Have you ever experienced the moment whenever you're encountering a story for the first time and you have this visceral reaction to it? A sudden realization that what you're witnessing will shape how you view the medium moving forward. In my experience, this emotional resonance is few and far between and usually reserved for seasoned creators that are exploring the full bounds of their capabilities and their understanding of the medium. But Zoe Thorogood is the exception to that rule. When I was reading It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth for the first time, I was completely blown away with her understanding of the medium and being able to fully explore the capabilities. And then I found out that she was an entire year younger than me. To put the icing on the cake, she also has 5 Eisner nominations. The only way that I would get nominated for an Eisner is if they mistook me for Brian Michael Bendis, which is a fair thing to do. I mean, we practically look identical. So today we're going to talk about Zoe Thorogood, and I'm going to deal with the impending dread of being old. But before we get into that, let's hear a word from our sponsors. I want to extend a sincere thank you to Karenzik and all of my supporters over on Patreon. If you want access to these videos early or your name at the end of each video, you can subscribe for as low as $1 per month. Also, we just opened up the Comic Krackle shop, which includes all of your favorite legally distinct designs. DC, please don't sue me. You can find the links to everything down in the description. And now, back to the show. Zoe Thorogood was born in Bradford, England on June 7th, 1998. She describes her childhood being lonely because she had a difficulty making friends. Whether it was social anxiousness at the fear of being rejected or just having difficulties expressing herself to her peers, she tended to have reclusive tendencies. She says that even from a young age, she's always wanted to be a storyteller, and it didn't matter which medium. She was an avid reader and pictured herself to grow up to be a playwright, and then an author, and then an actor, and then an artist. But one thing was for sure, she wanted to tell stories. This desire became increasingly consuming as she would watch her father play video games growing up. She specifically cited BioShock, Borderlands, and Fallout for the catalyst for making her want to be an artist. The reason that she wanted to be an artist is because she wanted to play a role in conveying stories to others and having them experience her work. From that point, she was introduced to the Pokemon manga series, which was her first experience with comics. Funny enough, she would then make the jump over to the manga series Death Note at the age of 12, and she fell in love with the medium of comics. Being completely captivated by the storytelling and the portrayal of mature themes, she came to the realization that the medium of comics hit on all of the aspects of art and storytelling that she gravitated towards. Comics would be the means of her expressing herself and a way for others to better understand her. Unfortunately, she wasn't much of an artist, and she was routinely discouraged at pursuing art by art teachers. It would come to a point where multiple teachers would urge her parents to make her stop with her silly cartoons. This would embolden Zoe, perhaps as an act of defiance, and only fueled her passion to use art as an outlet for expression. It wouldn't be until she was at uni, which is college for all you burger Americans, that she would find a teacher that would embrace her passion for art. She took refuge in receiving encouragement from somebody that she saw as someone with authority on the matter. This teacher would allow for Zoe to further cultivate her artistic vision through non-traditional means. The teacher would subsequently introduce Zoe to the idea of working in concept art, which circles back to her fascination with video games. Finally, she had been validated in her craft and had the potential of achieving the dream that she had since childhood. She would take an internship at the gaming studio Splash Damage and subsequently continue her studies for concept art and graphic design at Teesside University. After about a year into her studies, she came to the realization that her artistic process was not conducive to the model that's established for video game studios. Instead of allowing for inspiration to fuel her work, concept art would be at the mercy of the higher-ups that are dictating the final product. She knew that something had to change. During her free time, Zoe would start posting original pieces on her social media. She would post snippets of stories and character designs, or just vague ideas that she would flesh out later in the future. This would lead to her gaining a sizable following and the attention of some comic editors. As she was gaining exponential notoriety, she became further disillusioned with her work on video games and subsequently dropped out of university. It was from that point that she made it her mission to break into the comics industry. With this in mind and her portfolio in hand, she would attend a London comic convention that was put on by Image Comics, and she was determined to turn this dream into a reality. At this convention, she would be welcomed into the scene by various comic creators, all taking an interest in her work, and notoriously acclaimed comic writer Kieran Gillen proclaiming her to be the future of comics. No pressure, right? She describes this time in an interview with Between the Panels by stating, "It was June 2018, and I just started posting my spare time comics work online, and people seemed to dig it. So then I decided to make a comic. I pitched a story titled Interns Make Coffee, Not Paradoxes. It got rejected, but it was such an important moment for me. It took about a few months to make the pitch, and every day I remember waking up so excited I could barely sleep at night, because I was just that excited to make it." Although she was turned down by Image, she didn't let this get her down, and if anything, it fueled her passion further. Yes, it was a rejection letter, but they responded. Her art wasn't being denigrated or ignored like it had been in the past. It was a sign that if she further refined her capabilities, the idea of being a published comic creator was not outside the realm of possibility. Although she wasn't attending university any longer, she lived in a house with 10 other students and living off the dwindling rations from her student loans. She had mere months before she had to be out of that house and no prospects outside of comics. With this in mind, she would dedicate every waking hour to her craft. She would pick up minor freelance jobs while simultaneously chipping away at a project that she would begin to pitch to any editor that had previously showed interest in her work. While most of the editors seemed to be responsive to the pitch, the amount of editors that were responding started to dwindle, and she was coming up on her deadline. But just in the nick of time, she was able to receive the full green light from Avery Hill Publishing. This project would be named The Impending Blindness of Billie Scott. As the title suggests, we follow the titular character, Billie Scott, in the wake of receiving the news that she would be losing her vision in 2 weeks. This would be difficult news for anyone to hear, but it's only amplified once we gain the perspective on who Billie is. You see, Billie's an artist, and throughout the narrative, we see her tendency to dedicate too much of her life and her self-value into the art that she produces. This is only exemplified at the beginning of the story with her being isolationist and choosing to close down her barriers from the outside world because of her difficulty in expressing herself and the anxiety of social interactions. If all of her life is immersed into her work, who is she if not an artist? It doesn't take a stretch of the imagination to see the parallels between Billie and Zoe and their relationships as artists with their art. Zoe would later go on to talk about the inspiration for Billie Scott, saying that it's personal to her because it's a long-standing problem with her vision. She says that even from a young age, she had difficulties with her eyesight, and she went to go talk to her optometrist about the problems that she was experiencing. The optometrist basically let it slip that she was a high-risk candidate for going blind because her retina was slowly detaching over time. With this as the narrative framing device, Zoe would use Billie Scott as a means to pontificate of her role and and relationship with her art as an artist, the human condition and the complexities thereof, and the importance of building community. Through the perspective of Billie, we're treated to her liberation from the burden of normalcy, embracing a carefree nature, and showing her to be determined to make the most out of the time given. Similar to Last Holiday, the smash hit from 2006 starring Queen Latifah. And much like Last Holiday, it's surprisingly good. The book never appears to present the story in a way that feels safe or amateurish. And to the contrary, it routinely redefines its own visual language, and I just found that refreshing. The visuals fluctuate between stylized pencils portraying the real world to straight up horror imagery, and then expressionist portrayals of the human experience. Every page can be seen as Zoe is flexing her strengths and pushing the boundaries and rigidity of the medium to catch up to her. With her first introduction to the medium of comics coming by way of manga, it's obvious that she's working off of a list of influences that are completely different from her peers in Western comics. She takes the genre of slice of life and then completely subverts the expectations. It's made quite clear that she's setting the tempo for the reading experience, and it just radiates throughout. And speaking of the incorporation of rhythm, the book weaponizes the limitations of words and pictures. It's able to present a tangible representation of music, which I just found to be revolutionary. This could just be seen as a minor detail, but I found something poignant in her rebuffing of the industry standard of just showing music notes to denote sound. I mean, honestly, guys, what were you thinking when you started doing that? I mean, I took like 1 year of middle school band, and you think that showing me random notes is going to do anything more than break the illusion and my engagement to the story? I mean, grow up. Anyway, as I was saying, because I am who I am, it was hard to overlook the socioeconomic commentary for the narrative's depiction of the people that Billie befriends throughout the story. She leaves the stability of being housed and opts to seek out people that she admires. For the vast majority of the characters that are highlighted, each are victims to circumstances outside of their control, but for the most part, they refuse to succumb to their misfortune. From a street performer who dreams of playing on a stage to people that are unhoused and living in a shelter with nowhere to go, the story is able to expand on who these people are. It's a story that repeatedly espouses on the importance of making connections with other people and using art to express yourself to others. So when I was reading the story and I saw as Zoe was highlighting the realities in our world, instead of painting it with a shine of naive optimism, it was a surprise. As Nicholas Berman noted in his review for the Comics Journal, one of the interesting things about this book is the moment it has been written and released. The UK is about to become the first nation in history to both take itself out of an agreement with its largest trading partners in peacetime and also go from having a constitution, the European Union's, to having none. Our domestic political system is based on precedent. Boris Johnson's government has been as poor at managing COVID-19 and untrustworthy as Donald Trump's White House. The oncoming economic burst and border control nightmares follow 10 years of the sort of economic policies that have resulted in the rise in child poverty and homelessness. In that sense, the world of Billie Scott isn't fiction. The Tories, as they are wont to do, have also made central government support for the arts, from schools to youth and art centers, threadbare. The politics of the UK government today is that nobody and nothing matters more than the financial bottom line. Billie Scott represents the counterpoint. And that's what this book represents to me, a counterpoint against the apathy, the hopelessness, and the fatalism of the world that we're living in. It represents the call to embrace community and finding connections with others. This is a similar lesson that I learned in my first viewing of Last Holiday.
I really liked how in The Impending Blindness of Billie Scott, it's an interesting mix of like the story and the narrative has some sort of kind of fictionalization to it, some elements which are, not realistic or anything like that. The sheer premise of it being that you've been given a strict deadline to when you're going blind is maybe not something that would necessarily happen to a lot of people. But then finding the very real feelings and kind of palpable emotions in that. I was really struck by how empathetic it was. The characters felt like characters, and Billie feels like someone that by the end of it. Zoe wasn't afraid to make her flawed. Billie Scott is a bit petulant. She's upset, at this horrible situation. She's not taking it well. She does stuff that's stupid and reckless, and you can connect with her and you can empathize with her and really understand her perspective. But at the same time, she's not like some sort of perfect heroine. She makes mistakes, she makes flaws, she kind of can be a little bad to some of her friends. I really was struck by that element of it, as well as the art style. So I really liked how it kind of played with that kind of mixture of fantasy and reality, the cartoon and the realistic, and then it at the core of it is just this very emotional truth. It's a comic that made me cry. When I got to the end of it, I was shedding a tear, because it was really, I found it really moving, because I think it speaks to the emotional truth of being an artist and valuing your art. But it also speaks to an emotional truth of being an artist that I don't think I see get explored too much, is the dreaded realization of what are you if not for your art. Yeah, it's a very emotional book, and I really connected to it because of that.
As a result of the impending blindness of Billie Scott releasing in 2020, Zoe Thorogood would be met with critical acclaim and future opportunities as a professional comic artist. I first became aware of her work when she penciled issue 2 of Ha Ha alongside writer W. Maxwell Prince. I was immediately captivated by her use of panel-to-panel storytelling and the way that she is able to portray character acting all within one issue of a 32-page comic. Zoe would find significant name recognition and success from her work as the artist for the Image Comics series Rain. The series would be based on a short story from Joe Hill from Lock and Key fame and also son of Stephen King, but David M. Booher would take on the responsibilities of scripting the comic, translating it from a short story into the medium of comics. While the book isn't much to write home about, I was repeatedly in awe of Zoe's command of each comic page, even the covers, showing a literal through line for the progression of the story, are just completely captivating. The colorist for the series, Chris O'Halloran, played to each of Zoe's strengths and really immerses the reader in the reading experience. It was around this time in my reading that everything began to click for Zoe Thorogood's stylistic pencils. Every character depicted is unique in a similar fashion to the way that Frank Quitely does it. It's giving each of the characters definable characteristics and attributes, but not shying away from their imperfections. The influence from manga certainly shines through as she accentuates the facial features of characters, but more specifically, the eyes. The cliche is that eyes are the windows to the soul, which I never really understood until I saw Zoe's work. She's somehow able to convey the emotional spectrum and a character's motivations, all going back to her work and detailing in each character's eyes. And honestly, it can't be overstated how impressive it is to hyperfixate on one aspect of your work, even if it could be easily overlooked. Rain would finish with issue 5 in May of 2022. During that time, she would also partner with Danny Fernandez to tell a story in DC's Pride special. Also at the same time, she would design a new Spider character for Marvel's Spider-Geddon event that was happening for whatever. But in typical Marvel fashion, and is the true Marvel method, she as an artist got screwed over on proper compensation. Who would have thought? She posted about this situation in March of 2025 by stating, "The only time I worked with Marvel was for a character design. They paid me $100, LMAO, but I thought it would be cool to have done it, so I agreed. They then, without my knowledge, used my concept art as a cover with zero compensation and and I got so much hate for it because it was not cover art. It was a $100 sketch. So I guess the moral of the story is you made it in the comics industry if your labor is being exploited by one of the top comic publishers. Congrats, Zoe. You made it into the big leagues.
It's just an interesting anecdote. I think the person who told me this story was Alison Sampson, who's a British comics writer and artist. It was either Alison Sampson or Lucy Sullivan. It was one of the two. And they were talking about seeing, a little girl coming up to them, or a teenage girl coming up to them and showing them some pages and be like, do you think that these are good pages? You have sequential art, like to do a little portfolio review thing. And she was like gobsmacked by the pages and the work involved with them, and immediately reached out to Avery Hill Publishing and was like, I think this is someone that you should speak to, because it was Zoe Thorogood and it was pages from Billie Scott. And that I found, when I was told that story, I was just so mind blown by it, because it is, like you said, someone coming out the gate kind of fully formed in a sense. Like, she's got other kind of miscellaneous work from that time period. Just afterwards she did like Joe Hill's Reign, adapting a short story of his, and you can kind of see, maybe some of the learning curve there in terms of like weekly or monthly comics. But with Billie Scott, it is such like a knocking the doors down entrance of like, this is what I want to do as a creator. This is what I'm trying to say. I'm interested in pushing forward.
With this level of increasing notoriety, Zoe became one of the top creators that everybody was paying attention to for her next project to be released, and they wouldn't need to wait long. It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth was an autobiographic novel that released on November 9th, 2022. The story centers on Zoe as the protagonist, and we follow her through a 6-month span of her life as it's falling apart, and she's trying desperately to put the pieces back together. Let me say it now. This book changed me. From the beginning of the story, we witness as Zoe is dealing with her struggles with mental illness and suicidal ideation, and some of the way that these pages are rendered just triggers an instinctive response to look away. Maybe this stems from the sheer level of vulnerability or how blunt she is in her internal monologue, but it speaks to the brutally honest nature of depression and how it feels all-consuming. Throughout the narrative, Zoe is accompanied by a cast of characters later explained to be extensions of herself. These characters are comprised of the child, who is depicted to be a chibi version of herself and shown to be a delusional optimist. Teen Zoe, who's shown to be overly cynical and totally self-conscious. Happy, who, unlike the name suggests, is the personification of depression and trauma, and the lingering nature thereof. And the guy, who's a simplistic and matter-of-fact character that speaks as a voice of reason for Zoe. While autobiographical comics have been around in the medium and been a mainstay for the longest amount of time, I feel like It's Lonely is something different, because it speaks to the life of a 20-something and almost portrays it like journal entries that the reader should not be privy to. She utilizes the narrative to deconstruct her relationship with her art, and it's in sharp contrast with how it's portrayed in Billie Scott. At this point in her life, she has every ounce of ambition, but now she has expectations to live up to. In some areas, it reads as almost invasive because of the personal nature of this book. Zoe never strays from portraying herself in her most fragile and vulnerable moments, and we just happen to be there. The message in this book is not one of weakness, but it's an expression and a cathartic release of emotion. It's the visualization of therapy sessions that are under the guise of a slice of life comic. The story isn't catering to an audience because the audience is of one, for Zoe. In a Q&A on her YouTube channel, Zoe practically says that this was the case. She says that the catalyst for the book starting to be created was because she was getting out of a relationship with a longtime ex and also kicked out of her parents' house, which led her to spiral into a depressive episode. On that day, she penciled what would later go on to be the cover of the book, showing her as she's dancing in her kitchen, trying everything imaginable to get her mind off of the world outside of that moment. As time went on, she kept chipping away at pages, not really knowing if it was going to amount to anything, but wanting to do it nonetheless because it kept her busy. So that's a win. As the book began to take shape, she started incorporating some of her influences, namely Doki Doki Literature Club. For all you non-weebs out there who have no idea what that is, let me summarize it by saying that Doki Doki Literature Club is a video game that is disguised as something else, like a dating sim, I think, but then quickly evolves and breaks the confines of what people thought could be done in video games for horror. Zoe says that Doki Doki was a primary influence because she wanted to break the fourth wall in a way that played to the comics medium that couldn't be translated anywhere else. The method of achieving this effect is her blurring the lines between fiction and non-fiction, all based on where her interests lie. One moment she's recounting an awkward situationship, and another spiraling into a further depressive episode questioning her own existence. Additionally, Zoe would incorporate aspects of intermedia, playing with different forms and different stylistic representations to incorporate in the medium. This routinely shifts the art to the sensibilities of herself and allows for the reader to fully encapsulate what she is trying to portray, breaking the confines of words and pictures.
A huge thing that resonated with me about It's Lonely was the way that it explores mental health, depression, suicidal ideation, self-harm. Those are all things that, I've had personal experience with and I have a personal understanding and relationship with. Yeah, like I said earlier, I was sold on it in the first 5 pages, because in the first 5 pages, she looks at herself in the mirror and it's like, I want to kill myself. And I really appreciated the transparency and honesty of that. I know that in the kind of recent last decade or so, there's been kind of a gradual destigmatization of mental health. But I still think there's a lot of work to be done. I still think there's a lot of sensitivity around it that's just adopting a different sense. I remember reading an article about how the Grunge Museum in Seattle changed an exhibition information piece to say that Kurt Cobain unalived himself. And I thought that was it was like you're re-stigmatizing it and justifying it by, oh, you're appealing to sensitivities. Just say the truth. It was 3 decades ago. Anyone who's going to the Grunge Museum probably knows what happened to Kurt Cobain. And so I appreciated that It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth. It's straight up with it from the start of the book. And it wears that on its sleeve very transparently. But it also shows some of the messiness and the complexities of that. Obviously Happy being a metaphor for depression that I find really moving. And he's slightly terrifying and slightly adorable at the same time. I like that he's almost a comforting presence, because that's true. Something people don't talk about, but sometimes you end up missing being depressed when you're not, because you think, oh, I miss being able to just lounge around in bed all day and not feel bad about it. And I really just like the way that it captures so many of the complexities of that, and just the way that it's just a bit ever present. It's just always there. It is a through line throughout the book. I respect the openness of it. To do an autobiographic novel that isn't just happiness, sunshine, and rainbows, it's mainly her struggling with writer's block and, feeling like she's going mad, all of these different pits of misery and difficulties and everything, That's probably the thing that draws me to the book the most. And then I love the way that she uses the comics form to better supplement that. And I love it wholeheartedly. I genuinely think that it is one of the best graphic novels that I've ever read, full stop. And I think there's a reason it resonated with people so much, because I think that people were drawn to the transparency and the honesty of it, and then the kind of experimentation of it. Everything is in service to telling the story as intimately as it possibly can be, warts and all. And I think there's something very beautiful about that.
In 2023, Zoe would be nominated for 5 Eisners, 3 for Rain and 2 for It's Lonely. Unfortunately, she wouldn't win these awards, but Zoe, if you're watching, I would gladly present you with something that's even more prestigious. Give me a second. Presenting you with a Comic Krackle Award. Take that, Eisner Committee. I made this by hand, like a real artist, so who needs a little golden statue? In the aftermath of It's Lonely, Zoe took up the responsibilities for writing and art for Hack/, doing the miniseries titled Back to School. She would also write the comic tie-in to the video game Life is Strange with the miniseries titled Forget Me Not. lot. And then she would do some freelance work for Marvel, DC, and Image. In September of 2024, Zoe took to her Instagram and made a post stating, "Yesterday, my baby brother took his own life. He was 23 years old and the kindest boy who ever lived. The last time we spoke over the phone, we laughed and talked about the video games we would play when we were kids. I told him that next time I saw him, we should play Half-Life Deathmatch together again. Please look after the young men in your lives and tell them that they are loved and so special. My brother was so kind. He was so caring. He was so intelligent and thoughtful. He was too sensitive for this world. My brother was better than me in every way. I wish he was more of an asshole. I think then he could have been stronger. I don't know. I remember him as the little blonde boy who loved his chicken, Mankey, and anglerfish, and Lego, and telling me I look like a rat. When I look in the mirror, I just see my brother's face. So I guess you look like a rat too, buddy. He was very sick. He told me on Saturday things were good. He was doing better. I can't stop thinking about how he must have felt. He told me he'd never do this. He didn't want to hurt our family. But in the end, there was no way out. I know I'm going to make sure good things will come of this. My brother's legacy is that of kindness and care and understanding. But right now, I just want my brother back. I just want to play video games with him. I am forever changed. I love you, James. You are a right twat for doing this. I drew this drawing last year when your dumbass agreed to letting me write a book about you, but you didn't need to make it that dramatic. But hey, you're my brother. It's in our blood." When I originally had the idea to cover Zoe's entire career leading up to this point, I knew that I needed to talk about this and boost her message. Her stories have brought me a sense of visibility that I have never been able to experience anywhere else. And the least I can do is make a video praising her work and knowing that she's made an impact. Maybe you or someone you know is going through a similar experience. And if we can learn anything from the stories that Zoe has told, it's the importance of communicating and finding community. It's uncomfortable and it's difficult, and the world can be a lonely place, but it doesn't have to be. We all need someone to talk to, and we also need somebody who will listen. Attached to this video is a fundraiser for mental health charities that use their resources to help those people in need. So if you have the means, please donate. And Zoe, thanks for the stories.